Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Muchas gracias por estar conectados con nosotros el día de hoy. En nombre de la Cámara de Comercio Italiana en México, es un gusto poder estar hoy con la POLIMI Graduate School of Management, socia de la Cámara, para una ponencia muy interesante sobre la IA y cómo escalar en ese entorno tan dinámico, tan rápido. El día de hoy es un gusto contar con Mariana Espinosa, que es Head of Enrollment para las Américas de la POLIMI Graduate School of Management. Mariana, bienvenida.
Muchas gracias, Emanuela. Muy buenos días a todos. Muchísimas gracias por su tiempo, por estas ganas de conocer más sobre Polimi. Les voy a compartir brevemente mi pantalla porque el día de hoy tenemos eh, varias cosas importantes que contarles. Entonces, déjenme poner mi pantalla grande. Pueden ver ahora, ¿verdad? Maravilloso. Bueno, pues esta soy yo. Para empezar, pues quiero dejarles de antemano mi celular, mi WhatsApp, porque siempre surgen preguntas al final, así que para que puedan tomar un print screen y podamos hacer un follow-up después de esta sesión. Me da muchísimo gusto contarles que como Head of Enrollment trabajo en el Politécnico de Milán y es una escuela con muchísima tradición. Estamos en el mundo de la educación desde 1863 y tenemos un propósito muy claro, de tener esta misión de enseñar tecnología para la humanidad. Todos nuestros programas desde entonces han sido muy bien posicionados en áreas como la ingeniería, la arquitectura, el diseño. Y hace 40 años surgió el POLIMI, el Graduate School of Management, que es una escuela, una división del Politécnico que se enfoca en todas las áreas de negocios. Y esto lo menciono porque hoy en día, con este mundo de transformación digital en el que vivimos y a la velocidad en que todas estas dinámicas avanzan, el hecho de que nosotros vengamos de esta plataforma de ingeniería, arquitectura, diseño, nos permite desarrollar programas con una base muy sólida, no solamente con una visión tecnológica, sino siempre considerar al humano al centro, la creatividad y el pensamiento crítico, que hoy en día son habilidades muy importantes que dan razón de ser a muchos de nuestros programas, pero que hoy en día son muy importantes para mantenernos empleables y competitivos en el mercado. Y estas son las credenciales que nos respaldan, nuestro heritage, los rankings, la diversidad, la posibilidad de hacer networking. Y hoy en día hay justamente lo que les contaba, hay tantos lugares para poder aprender que si lo pensamos, incluso el conocimiento podría ser gratuito, no tendríamos que ir a ningún lado. Pero hoy más que nunca importa en dónde tú vas a aprender, en dónde tú vas a obtener este conocimiento, porque para tener la certeza de que es realidad y verdad lo que tú estás aprendiendo. Dos, que estás obteniendo conocimiento de gente experta en lo que dice y en lo que hace y también para tener la posibilidad de conectar y tener un networking que te va a ayudar a potenciar tu carrera. Y lo menciono porque hoy en día más que nunca me parece realmente importante eh, las credenciales de tus estudios y cómo y dónde lo estás obteniendo. Y bueno, pues nosotros estamos en Milán. Nuestros programas se imparten en dos campus que tenemos, principalmente en Bovisa y en Avigli. Si alguna vez han estado en Milán, saben que, bueno, Bovisa es la parte tradicional, compartimos instalaciones con el tradicional Politécnico de Milán y Navigli, pues es un centro creativo, financiero, está en el corazón de Milán. Y también tenemos algunos cursos, alguna parte de nuestros masters que se imparte en Roma. Pero realmente, bueno, Milán es una ciudad que no tiene nada que pedirle al mundo. Es una ciudad en donde hemos visto que han celebrado los Juegos Olímpicos, están todas las compañías multinacionales, tiene una vida vibrante, divertida. Y cuando pensamos en educación, yo llevo más de 20 años trabajando en educación para diferentes instituciones en el mundo. Y creo que Milán y el Politécnico como tal tiene algo muy importante que ofrecer, el costo-beneficio. Tienes la posibilidad de tener una vida y una educación de primer nivel con unos costos de vida muchísimo más competitivos que cuando pensamos en en algunas ciudades más tradicionales. Nuestros programas en particular se caracterizan porque solamente el 1% de las universidades en el mundo tienen la triple corona. Esto es una acreditación que te dan estas asociaciones para certificar la calidad de los estudios. Estamos en diferentes rankings, pero también somos una B Corp, es decir, todo lo que enseñamos tiene una visión sostenible. Ustedes van a escuchar mucho sobre temas de economía circular, ¿no? Que tiene que ver muchísimo con reciclaje, el doble uso. ¿Por qué? Porque sabemos y como expertos en tecnología y en negocios sabemos hacia dónde vamos y qué es lo importante de enseñar hoy en día. Con un propósito muy claro, hacer la diferencia, conectar ideas y prepararlos a todos para un futuro mejor. No importa la edad que tengamos, nunca es tarde para aprender, para desaprender y para aprender nuevas habilidades. Nuestros programas, como les contaba, pues se imparten en Milán, tienen una duración aproximada de 12 a 24 meses. Tenemos programas que se imparten en inglés o en italiano. Y justo para todos los miembros de la Cámara, queremos contarles que todos nuestros programas tienen un 20% de descuento solamente a los miembros de la Cámara. Y queremos celebrarlo con una super masterclass el día de hoy. Eh, y es acá donde les contaba un poquito, ¿no? Este costo-beneficio. Si hacemos la conversión en la inversión de la educación, pues realmente son tuitions muy competitivos versus algunos otros programas en el extranjero. Y nuestros programas generalmente pues van a cubrir, ¿no? Estos temas de que tú has elegido en un máster, pero tienen un core, ¿no? La parte de general management, la parte de las especializaciones que tú estás eligiendo, vas a tener un project work o en un internship, porque creemos firmemente en que la teoría tiene que ser orientada a la acción y vas a tener pues cursos que pues hablan mucho de lo que te he contado ahora, ¿no? La parte de leadership, la parte de sustainability, la parte internacional y sobre todo el Master Your Growth, cómo tú vas a crecer como humano y como profesional con esta experiencia, que para nosotros realmente es importante el impacto que podemos generar, porque pues venir a Polimi realmente es una experiencia muy transformadora. Brevemente acá en la pantalla, no voy a ir a detalle, les voy a poner un ejemplo de los cursos que ustedes, los másters que ustedes pueden venir a hacer. Tenemos diferentes ramas de estudio, desde la transformación digital, la parte sustentable, tenemos maestrías en funciones de negocio bastante específicas y también tenemos diferentes programas en asociación con otras escuelas en donde ofrecemos el doble o el triple grado como los que ustedes ven acá en pantalla. Entonces, no quiero quitar mucho tiempo a la presentación porque realmente hemos el día de hoy puesto en la sesión a un gran profesional, a un profesor que nos va a dar una masterclass muy interesante. Acá les dejo nuevamente mis datos, mi correo, para que puedan conocer más a detalle el proceso de inscripción. Pero el día de hoy tenemos al doctor Angelo Cavallo, en donde vamos a aprender sobre algo muy importante, hablar de la inteligencia artificial desde una perspectiva aplicada. Veo mucha gente todavía hablando de marketing digital. Hablar de marketing digital hoy es obsoleto. Tenemos que hablar de growth. Tenemos que hablar de toma de decisiones de negocio con data. Y realmente me parece que el profesor Ángelo nos va a compartir una clase en donde veremos herramientas sobre estrategia, crecimiento, metodologías, y él es profesor del POLIMI, está en Milán hoy en día, tiene una agenda muy ocupada, pero con su expertise, el día de hoy vamos a poder conocer un poquito más sobre cómo trabajamos y cómo enseñamos en el Politécnico. Así que bueno, no quiero tomar más tiempo de la sesión. Ahora, doctor Ángelo, el micrófono es tuyo. Muchísimas gracias a todos por estar acá.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Mariana. Para mí, bueno,
We can switch to English.
I think we need to switch to English. As I told to Mariana, I speak a little bit of Spanish, but I don't usually teach in Spanish, so I feel anyway confident to run the class in English. But maybe Mariana, next time we can think about it. It would be interesting. I'm very happy to be here today. I want to introduce first myself very quickly, and then perhaps share just a few slides that I have for you, just as a trace to set a common ground for eventually, an interesting discussions that we can have together. Of course, it's a masterclass in which we want to just give a little bit of the feeling of touching interesting subjects that we teach in Polytechnic. We try to stay updated as much as possible. We try to fuel our teaching with fresh research, both looking into practice and scientific publication. That's what we do. In our model, our professor are not just theorists, but they are very much hands-on and engage with practice. Most of us lead projects directly with companies. We support companies. The third mission is super important for us. So let's say we are not those kind of researchers, a bit too much into a different word, different academic word, let's say. Anyway, so I'm Angelo Cavallo. I'm professor of entrepreneurship and strategy at POLIMI since many years. I haven't counted yet at the moment, but yeah, many years. My passion and my heroes are top managers, entrepreneurs. I like to do a lot of qualitative interviews because I get to know a lot from their experience, and then I'm able also to share and codify this knowledge and share with, for example, you in this context. In the last years, I've been in the first years of my career, I've been a lot focused on the business model validation, early phase in which companies have to existing companies or eventually new venture have to test fresh new ideas and try to build up new products out of that, or again, even new company. Recently, I kind of turned my interest into the phase of scaling, and I discovered that basically scaling as a topic, getting a company to grow fast is actually very much connecting with the design, the early design. Indeed, I talk usually about scaling by design, for example. So it's very important since the beginning to know about scaling. So the interest is about those topics because every company is looking for new ways of growth. Every company is trying to improve the degree of scalability. We will see today what we mean by that, because there's a bit of confusion, I guess, on this topic. Those are the reason why I wanted to touch this topic with you. And then we have a big factor, which is AI. Everybody's talking about AI. I will, needless to say that all the process of scaling is enabled by AI. Everything we do is enabled by AI. But the most interesting aspects is what I will explain to you later in the classes. So stay connected till the end, because I have something that has been very much developed in the last 6 months. We got to get used to those timing. Like every 6 months, there's something new. You probably have seen what is happening with Cloud Code, which is completely outperforming OpenAI. That only 6 months ago, we thought, there was a different positioning, right, into those providers of AI solutions. So stay till the end, because I have something fresh. I'm hoping that it's something fresh. Maybe some of you already is in touch with those topic, but yeah. Let me get started just to have a trace, otherwise I can talk forever. But I want to keep and stay close to specific topic. So first of all, I need to check that everything is okay and you see the material, right? Perfect. I see Mariana saying yes. So yeah, I trust it. So this is the agenda and the topic that I will explain to you today. So we will talk, of course, about business model and scalability. It's very important that we define those constructs. I need to define the key construct. First, because professors tend to like definitions. Second, I think it's useful for everybody to know, to use the proper words to, name the things that we use every day. If you go in front of investors, you talk about the business model, but you don't name it business model, it's a problem, right? So we need to know everything we speak. We need to know the definition. Then we need to go into some cases about business model scalability and the relevance of business experiments. Last not least, I want to talk about the real game changer with AI in growth, which is the opportunity that we have through synthetic user. First thing is why. I want to start with the why for a simple reason. I remember when I was on the other side sometimes, and always when I am in front of a speaker, I want to know why I'm here. I mean, you should know why you're there. You should have some interest in the topic for sure. But the speaker has to start with why. Otherwise, it's difficult to connect with the speaker. So why we are talking about growth today? And I want to start with numbers. My background is engineering, and then I turned into management. So we like numbers like anyone else. This is a McKinsey study that says that the average growth rate is 2.8%. Now, if you think about 2.8% is not super high growth rate, right? And this is a study published by McKinsey in 2022, 2023, considering 5,000 companies 10 years before COVID, in order to avoid any bias or influence from exogenous forces. So this number tells you that growth is not easy. And average growth is actually 2.8%, not 200%, not even 10%. And this is the first fact. Then there is another study published by an Italian scholar and other scholars from all over in Industrial Corporate Change, a scientific journal, in 2020, and then also Pisano in an HBR article. They are both mentioning that they've done a study on US firm from the 80s, and they observed those firm growth rate for 30 years. And they basically realized that 15% of those firms actually show persistent growth, continuous growth over 30 years. What does it mean, this? It's very simple. Persistent growth is difficult, for sure, but achievable, okay? This is a simple statement, but super powerful. Why is it super powerful? We know, and we are used to believe that growth is something that is cyclical. Like, there are moments in which you go up, there are moments in which you go down, which, by the way, it can be true for some realities, but we should know also that although it's rare, there are companies able to go for persistent growth and high growth in some cases. So we should try to learn from this company. We should try to learn the methods. We should learn the way they organize, the way they strategize. And this is basically my overall motive of research in the last 3 years. In the end, everything around scaling and growth goes around a specific topic, which is the business model. Okay? The business model can be defined through the way companies create, deliver, and capture value from the market. That's a very simple definition. What is it then? Scalability. So according to the scientific literature, scalability is an organizational capability that supports company into the scaling process. What is it then? The scaling process. The scaling process is a growth process of a company, peculiar growth process in which a company shows, if we want to give a threshold, just to have a reference point, is where a company shows plus 20% growth rate, revenue growth rate for over 3 years, consecutive years. Now, when we talk about scalability and growth, I don't want to do an example that looks into some, big tech company as usual. I want to use an historical example, just to give you an idea, okay, that this construct can go back to any case, not just tech case, for example. So this is the first internet, the telegraph. That's the way we called the telegraph, the first internet, basically. It was firstly invented by two brothers, French brothers, in 1700, but it wasn't successful. And then 137 years later, or something like that, Samuel Morse created a code Morse and was the first person that was able to turn the invention into innovation, which means building a much stronger business model and turning the invention into a commercial success. What is the difference? We can analyze the difference through the degree of scalability that explains why one solution was more successful than the others. So I will be quick here and go straight to the point. The invention, the optical telegraph, had a lot of mechanical aspects which required a lot of human intervention. This makes the cost structures less agile and also less scalable in the end. Plus, there was no patent mechanisms, so it was very difficult to find a commercial model. So it was only funded by the state, and I think was operating during the French Revolution or something like that, or even later. But it was not a commercial success. And the scalability, the pure scalability, was one of the factors that didn't make this solution expand and become a commercial success. If you look at the Samuel Morse, the big difference is that there was a patent mechanisms, more or less, but there was especially less human intervention required because it was through electric wires and electric signal that was working the operational system. And so it was less required the human intervention. This means a more scalable solution. So companies were able to generate recurring revenues by selling what we could call today communication as a service, right? A very scalable business. And that was the reason why this solution was adopted. So sometimes scalability and growing fast, it's a matter of staying into the market or dying. It's not that we want to grow, because the alternative is that your solution is not going to be successful. So it's not that we want to go for scaling at any cost. Is that in some cases, not all, okay, you need to increase your scalability solution. You need to go for a process of scaling, because otherwise you will not be sustainable. Now, I want to turn completely, case and context, and I want to go into another context. And this context is the fashion industry. And I want to take the case of Brunello Cucinelli. I mean, as Italian, I like to do the example of made in Italy. And again, it's another way to use a case of an industrial company, because I know that when people talk about growth, AI, scaling, everybody thinks about tech all over the place. Technologies anyway, anywhere, right? Even like automotive industry is 50% now software, which was not that before. So technology is everywhere. So we don't need to look for technology cases, but technology is everywhere. But I want to make this case specifically because I want to show you that we can talk about scalability for industrial case. This is the case, for example, I like the case of Brunello Cucinelli. They started as a wholesale. And here you can see the business model through the three mechanisms: value creation, capture, deliver. I will not go into that. So the first idea of Brunello Cucinelli is I want to scale and reach as much as customer as possible through the wholesale. So I don't need to create, a hub or a specific store. I will use Rinascente ones. I will use Nordstrom. I will use other chains, and I can reach very quickly through their channels, my customers. And so I can sell indirectly to my consumer. This was the first strategy, right? Then at some point, he decided to go into direct-to-consumer retail, just like Luxottica has done, just like also Moncler has done. And apparently, the idea of building your own store can be considered a choice that is not a scalable choice, because you increase your operations, you increase your cost structures. So it doesn't seem like you're going into scaling, right? Yet it all depends the way you do it. For example, if you create one store format, validated, it can be easily replicated. And so you can try to keep the operation and the cost of operations under control. Standardize the store operation, staffing, and logistics. Those are all sources of operational scalability. And then there are also hidden scalability sources, the way I call it. So when you create your own stores, you create higher customer lifetime value through repeated purchases, strong brand loyalty, and you can see organic referral, a reduced churn rate. So although direct to consumers seems to require more upfront investments, these investments enable a long-term scalable growth. What is it? Scalable growth is a systematic and repeatable growth. And this is very important. So the message is sometimes you do choice that seems to be less scalable choice, but the result is that you grow. Of course, the direct-to-consumer retail is not the only business model through which, a brand like Brunello Cucinelli can grow. Of course, there is, digital channels, e-commerce platforms that enable you to do that. I want just to remark you one thing. Going e-commerce, it doesn't mean necessarily scaling. Everybody thinks software digital is about scaling. No. It depends how you do it. This is an example of a company, and there is an article in Financial Times in 2024 that really makes you the example of a company that was one of the first pioneers in e-commerce, but it was not successful. Why that? Because scaling is also about building and organizing the operations to scale. So sometimes we think about too much about the user interface or how to attract consumers, and then it's not easy to organize the operations to do that. So Match did this mistake. In Italy, we have Yux.com, for example. The other day, I was talking with the founder, and he told me that the most difficult job of Yux to become successful, we are talking about a startup in the 90s that then became 1.5 billion company when it was sold by the founder. I think 5 years ago or something like that. And he told me the most difficult job was organize in order to scale. So what I want to give it to you as key message till now. First, we think about scaling too late sometimes, okay? But it's not a topic that you can consider too late. Sometimes scaling is by design. It all depends about your business model. The way you design your business model will tell you if you have a chance to scale or not. Another big message, scaling is a relative construct. Every single company can scale, okay? What is scaling then? I told you a little bit later before this, but in basic terms, it means increasing returns without a proportional increase in cost. In modern economies, you need more customer lifetime value and less cost per acquisitions. Okay? What is a scalable business model then? A scalable business model is a business model that has the potential to scale by design. Now, I want to make also sure you understand that I was talking about growth, I'm talking about scaling. Well, scaling is a peculiar growth process. Of course, not all growth processes are scaling. In terms of outcome, for example, a company that grows fast can be considered an high growth firms if it shows 10 to 15% growth rate annually. That is considered high growth. Okay, it's not yet scaling. Scaling is, generally speaking, plus 20% every year for 3 consecutive years growth revenue. Okay, growth rate. So not all growth processes are scaling, but scaling is a growth process. That's the relationship between growth and scaling, which I believe is important. Okay. By the way, what is relevant is focusing on strategies to grow. If then the results is plus 20%, plus 30%, or plus 10%, then depends on many factors. And of course, depends on the context as well. Okay. Another big difference I want to share with you is the difference between modern scaling and traditional economies of scale. I'm sure you're familiar, like scaling in terms of economies of scale is a topic that is there since ever. But the difference is that construct, the traditional economies of scale, is volume-driven cost reduction. When we talk nowadays about modern scaling, we talk about, for example, ecosystem growth strategies and technology leverage. We talk about economies of scope. We talk about network effects. We talk about economies of learning or economies of growth. And the objective is the same, return to scale. Okay, so I know we don't have time to go through all this construct, but I wanted to just stimulate you about those topics. Okay. A very important aspects that I want to share with you is that you do business model scaling, you do grow if you apply a scientific approach. If you go and look for new growth levers and you immediately turn your intuition into test. Okay? If you do this, if you move from intuition to validate intuition through scientific method to testing, then you have opportunities to grow. This is taken by a book called Growth Hacking by Sean Ellis, which was one of the most influential book on growth strategy in the last, I think, in the last 10 years, because the book was published, I think, in 2017. And I really recommend you to read this. We did a step forward. Personally, I tried to contribute on this because, the word of growth hacking put a lot of emphasis on the hacking, like what is it hacking? Finding a shortcut in order to grow fast. But also the father of this approach of the growth hacking said that probably the idea of hacking is not good for a simple reason. We can't talk about, hacking is also by chance. You need luck, serendipity, we used to say, right? Why? What we want to teach is method. and using this approach is method. That's why, together with the dean of our business school and an entrepreneur, we also wrote a book on this topic, which is called growth engineering, not growth hacking. The emphasis is that we need to find a method, just like engineers, in order to build things, to build structure, to build the process. We need to have a method there. It's not just that we can look for shortcuts. Growth doesn't happen by chance or by luck or by hack. It may happen, but it's more like an exception. Companies have to follow discipline, have to follow methods. This is the biggest message that I think we have the responsibility to share with professionals in all over the place. So I'm very happy that now I have the opportunities to share with this audience, with this very interesting audience from Mexico. Just to give you an idea that through the experimentation, some companies really had big growth. And it was method, it was not hack. Okay? So this is an example of Airbnb, which made a simple A/B test about the introduction or not introduction of 20 photographers in order to have on Airbnb professional photos rather than the photos that me, you, and anybody else could put there, which were not professional. They made these experiments. They understood that it was worth it to introduce photographers. And this was the results in terms of nights booked in Airbnb. So they were already growing and making some millions, but still they were looking for new growth levers. And they found into the introduction of photographers. But they did a lot of tests before doing this introduction, because sometimes it can be expensive and it may not lead to results. This is another picture regarding Twitter. At some point, Twitter said we need to do a little bit more. And they showed this picture showing the number of tests they have done and the increase of testing that they've done along the way. Especially when you are business to consumer, you got to run a lot of tests in order to learn. That's the very big objective. You need to learn about your business in order to implement informed decisions, strategic decisions that will lead you to grow. So the importance of adopting an experimentation approach is fundamental. In our Politecnico, in our school, we have dedicated course to growth and to experiment methods. It's basically the way we teach nowadays all over the place for our business courses and strategic courses. Another picture that I wanted to give it to you, then I think we are almost there. And I would be much more interested in learning from you and hear from you what kind of curiosity and questions this very short presentation can bring to you. I don't know if you know this page, but this is a page that tells you how many experiments in the end have been killed by Google. It means basically that Google tried a lot of things that then were closed. So the approach of those big tech that have been successful along the last 20 years is that accepting that you're going to run a lot of tests, you're going to invest a lot into testing. Some of those things will be outdated at some point, you will kill them, but that's the approach of going for continuous growth. Last and not least, as I promised in the beginning, since we talk more about AI, I want to say you a couple of things here. Growth is made of method. That's what we said before. Experimentation is the method, which, by the way, is nothing new. The scientific method is there since ever. It's just that in Silicon Valley, they started to adopt through the lean startup back in the early 2000s, or 2010, 2009, there was a first book codified this approach, but it's there since ever. Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo Galileo have been the fathers of the scientific method, which means you get to test the theory through validated experiments. We just brought into the market, okay, the business experiments. Now, what does change when we talk about experimentation with AI. It's very simple. AI has given us the opportunity to, everybody talks about the experiments at product level. If you know the platform, for example, Lovable, they don't pay me, so it's not advertising. I just admire the work they do, but probably there are others out there. But through Lovable, you can send, for example, you can build some prototypes, MVP, digital, I'm talking, for example, very quickly. And so everybody's talking about, okay, it's super easy to make new products through AI. But the real game changer is that you can create the twin of the market now. Those are some tools that are doing that. So those are tools that I really suggest you to look into those. So Aru, Synthetic User, Huxia, those are platforms that are creating the twin of the market. So basically, if you have some ideas, of how your company can grow, and you don't have time, or there is complexity in reaching real customers, they create for you a synthetic users, which is the twin of a real user, and you can test through this. Okay, so there is platforms there is a lot of articles about synthetic users. I really recommend you to look into those things, because this is the real game changer about growth and AI in the next years. Okay. Of course, if I had time, I would give a lecture dedicated only to this. But remember, everybody is talking about new products through AI, but the real game changers is that you can actually make experiments about market development, not product development. Okay, so this is the real game changer that I want to share with you. And another aspect that you should consider is that in the next days, in the next years, it's going to be very easy to build products through AI, and we're going to have a web super crowded. So the real ability will be growth strategy, the way you make whatever you build known by customers in a web that is overcrowded. That is another key message I would like to share with you before closing this masterclass right on time, 45 minutes. Thank you so much, and I'm open here for you and for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavallo. Muchas gracias por esa ponencia tan interesante. Ahora tenemos un espacio para preguntas y respuestas para todos los asistentes. Pueden ponerlas en el chat, pueden ser en inglés o en español, no hay problema. O si gustan, pueden igual levantar la mano y les abrimos micrófono para que puedan hacerla directamente. Vamos viendo si llega alguna pregunta.
Don't be shy. Also, I'm happy to answer about any curiosity you have about the topic. I'm sure there are some professionals that may understand the topic a little bit that I've been explaining, but yeah, feel free to reach me whenever, whatever
Yeah,
questions
not
you.
every day we have the chance to have a professor from Italy, so take advantage of the opportunity to ask your questions about the topic, about the school.
I know it's the English. The English makes people shy. Next time I will run in Spanish. Promise.
It's a good chance to practice as well, no? Practice
It is,
English.
yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, but really it can be questions
O
in English, in
practicar en
Spanish,
italiano.
o en italiano, sí. En el idioma que gusten. Si no, bueno, vamos a dar un par de minutitos más. Mientras tanto, aprovecho para comentar a los asistentes que esa sesión fue grabada y que la subiremos al canal YouTube de la Cámara para que puedan igual compartirla con quien a lo mejor no pudo estar aquí el día de hoy o volverla a ver.
Y bueno, yo sí tengo un par de preguntas para el profesor, porque, bueno, creo que a veces la audiencia es un poco tímida, pero yo tengo una curiosidad. Eh, Porque si hoy tuvieras que escalar una empresa desde Latinoamérica con recursos limitados, ¿qué palancas activarías primero en la era de la inteligencia artificial?
Mariana, I think we have a question in the chat.
We do actually. Would
Ah,
you want to go with that?
Probably we start with Alfonso, and then maybe I'll go back to the Mariana question.
Perfect.
So thank you so much, Alfonso, for your questions. I see that there is also another one, so we're getting there.
ya, muy
So the
bien.
question is, how do you think that the gap between Latin America and Europe can be used for scaling business? Um, the gap between Latin America and Europe. Well, I think Latin America may have specific challenges, but I may say that in there are some countries that are doing very great. I mean, I had the chance to be in Colombia and Brazil, for example, not Mexico, unfortunately, but I've seen interesting things happening there. And sometimes when countries are, let's say, emerging somehow in the scene and the tech and stuff like that, there is a big opportunity, and there is also an advantage in not having let's say, an history of scaling companies, for example. I mean, there are always disadvantages and advantages, but sometimes history can be a trap because if you have been successful for long, sometimes you are. It's called path dependency. It's a theory. So I think you should look into Latin America as an opportunity to scale. So I don't know if I answered your questions because the question was, how do you think the gap between Latin America and Europe can be used for scaling? Probably, Alfonso, if you can speak up so I can understand better maybe the questions if you want. Um,
Yeah, Alfonso, I can open your mic if you want. Let's do it.
Alfonso está aplicando al POLIMI y ha sido aceptado.
Ay,
Yes,
ah,
felicidades.
Congratulations.
thank you. So my question was from the technological side, because in Europe there's been a lot of development in technology, and there's a lot of emerging countries nowadays in Latin America that through these new tools have the opportunity to maybe scale their business to Europe. But it's also what you said of brand recognition, because here in Latin America, we see products from Europe like better quality, and how that gap, first cultural and then technological, can be used for the scaling of business. That was my approach.
Yeah. I think when you need companies most of the time or sometimes fail because of premature scaling. I think first of all, if a company starts in Latin America, you have already a big internal market to address, and that could be easier, to scale around Latin America. And then you may think about how we can be different and how we can expand over Europe. But of course, Europe is it's a very crowded environment. It's super complex because there is not one language and there is not one bureaucratic system. Indeed, we are talking about that now. So I hope in the future you're not going to have this issue. But you have a big internal market to address first. So my suggestion would be the gap is big, so don't rush into scaling into the unknown. It's better to stick with Latin America, and then only when you feel ready to go then move into expansion, which could be Europe, which can be US, which somehow could be easier in some cases. And the entrance for Europe, for Latin America, clearly could be Portugal or Spain, clearly for language reason. I think cultural aspects are always very important in this regard. So that would be my 2 cents on this.
Yeah,
Thank you, Alfonso, and looking forward to see you in here.
you too.
I see one other questions. Lei mentioned, it's in Italian, this one. So lei ha menzionato sentenze chiuse come un elemento di svolta quando smettono di essere uno strumento utile e iniziano a presentare un rischio per il processo decisionale. This is a very important question. Unfortunately, Zaira, nobody has a big answer here because these tools have been developed very recently. I think in the last year, last 6 months. So we don't have a big knowledge. What do we know about it is they really make they're reliable in terms of the way they kind of summarize potential answer from the real customers. There are some scientific studies that says that the reliability is between 80 to 90%, or even more in some cases. So it's pretty high. But what I suggest always in this specific phase, maybe in the future will be different, is to don't rely only on synthetic users when you have to make decisions, because it's too soon to go there. It's always very important to consider, to stay in touch. I mean, we have seen this in many other contexts. Technology is helping, but then don't forget about your eyes, your gut feeling, because intuition will be always very important. Then I see another questions still by Zaira. Si tuviera que elegir una sola métrica para saber si un negocio realmente puede escalar, ¿cuál sería? This is very important questions. People call this solo, this one metric, they call North Star. And unfortunately, that North Star metrics is idiosyncratic. So every company has its own. For example, for Airbnb, it's the number of bookings per night. That's their North Star metrics. For each company is different. One thing I really want to remark, guys, is strategy is by context. Growth strategy is by context. We can work on methods and principles that can guide entrepreneurs, but we cannot find generic rule that apply in every context. It doesn't exist one model fits all. It doesn't exist one metrics that always applies in every case. For example, one metric that is very important to monitor is the customer lifetime value. But every company has its own formula for that. There are some generic ones to explain the construct, but if every company has its own, because it's idiosyncratic, it depends on the specific context. So, unfortunately, reality is complex. And please, don't trust people that try to simplify reality. That would be my answer. There is luckily enough, another questions by Georgina. Of course, Zaira, let me know if everything is clear and if you want to comment on what I'm telling, okay? Otherwise, I'm going into the next question just to try to use all the time as possible. Georgina is asking, do you think there is a risk with social jobs like approach with people, like relation with people face to face? I didn't get this specifically, Georgina. I don't know if you want to add a little bit of context.
I gave you the opportunity, Georgina, to open your mic if you want to clarify a bit. But I think she means the interaction with people. If you think it's a limit for the interaction to be only through social media and not in person, I think she probably means that.
Yeah. No, it's a very important question. Okay, I got it. As I said, in a world where I will give you an example. In a world where, especially after COVID, we all thought everything can be done online. Let's do everything online, right? And I remember in Italy, we have seen 2, 3 e-learning platform, and they were really surfing the fact that everybody can propose education programs very democratically, and we don't need any institutions anymore. We don't need to meet each other. Now, I tell you what is happening nowadays. Relationship are key. Having diviso teaching is important. Having diviso class is important because you don't learn only from me. You learn from the teacher, but you learn a lot into the interactions with other students. And face-to-face, there are scientific studies there that tells you that the value that you can bring home is much higher. So I gave you an example of education, but I can give you another example. I know the founder of a company that already has scaled quite a lot. And he tells me that sometimes he does call with customers, faking that he's just an employee of the company. Or sometimes he makes focus group with customers in person. Sometimes he's the one that is looking into info of the company because he doesn't want any filter and want to rely directly to their customer to understand them. So this is another example that I wanted to give you about the importance of connecting with your partners, with your friends, with your mates in the class, with the teacher, with your customers even. So in a world that is digital, physical proximity still matters, okay? We tend to think in extremes. It's like everything needs to be online or everything needs to be in person. There should be a middle in which both are relevant, right? So I believe and I think the middle is important. Like through the online, I had the occasion to meet you today. Super interesting, super good. You want to have a specific, experience and learn more. In-person teaching is also very important. We have all the chances. We have flex programs. We have been one of the leading companies, leading, business school in making only online courses. So we believe in this form of teaching, but we also believe into relationship, direct relationship, if that is possible, of course. I hope I have answered, Georgina. It took a bit too long, but I think I just wanted to give you as much as possible. I see another questions, right? Se la crescita senza direzione può trasformarsi in caos, come definiresti la differenza tra scalare semplicemente e crescere? I'm not sure I understood the question. And this is in Italian. So the difference, so the difference between scaling and growth, as I told you before, scaling is a growth process, but not all the scaling are growth process. I mean, not all the growth process are scaling, sorry. Because growth is about, is broader. Scaling is a peculiar growth process that leads you to very rapid expansion. And we're talking usually about plus 30%, plus 20% year by year for over 3 years, consecutive years. So that's the main difference. But I agree with you, the growth needs a direction. And indeed, we wrote a book about this, which actually we will translate probably in Spanish, by the way, about growth engineering. You need method, you need structures, you need to work as an engineer for growth. So you need the direction, actually. There is no chance you will grow through chaos, for sure. I'm not sure if I answered the questions, but in case, I'm here for any clarification.
Okay, well, I think that was our last question, and I think we don't really have time for more. Thank you very much, Angelo, for your time. Thank you for everybody who participated in the session, who asked questions. Thank you, Mariana, for facilitating this platform and this great opportunity to have Angelo with us today on such an interesting and relevant topic today. So, on behalf of the Italian Chamber of Commerce, it was a pleasure. And we're going to look forward to organizing more events like this, both virtual and presential here in Mexico. And Mariana, I don't know if you want to share one last message.
Thank you very much, Emanuela. I'll switch to Spanish para mantenernos súper conectados. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Somos miembros de la Cámara, pueden encontrar nuestro contacto con Emanuela. De igual manera, como les comenté, estoy a disposición por correo, por WhatsApp, justamente para pues seguir construyendo estas relaciones, seguir enriqueciéndonos con estos temas que son muy disruptivos y necesarios. Compartir una mañana de aprendizaje, pues la aprecio muchísimo y aprecio muchísimo, profesor Angelo, de estar acá con nosotros, compartiendo con todos esos estudiantes, potenciales estudiantes de POLIMI que quieren aprender. Y pues estamos a la orden, Emanuela. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Que pasen un gran día y buenas noches, profesor Angelo.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Stay in touch. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you very
Muchísimas
much.
gracias. Bye. Have a
Bye.
great day.